People go nuts for those tiers. Once you sort of add the decor and really have fun with it, that's a show-stopping moment that people are just not gonna forget. I'm Natasha Pickowicz. I am a pastry chef and writer based in New York City, and we are here today in the NYT Cooking studio, and we're gonna make a wedding cake. Making a wedding cake is sort of this final frontier in pastry and cake making. It's the thing that we look to professionals to make for us. But I'm here to say that we should be making wedding cakes for your family members, your friends. It's really just the most special way that you can sort of participate in someone's big day. If you have a relationship to the couple at the wedding, then already you've sort of like elevated the event into something that feels bespoke and specific and personal. The decor moment of a wedding cake is definitely my favorite part of the process. I think that's when you can really sort of infuse the cake with your own personality, your style, but also like your environment. Maybe you have a small container garden and you're growing little edible herbs. It's about bringing those unexpected elements into a cake to kind of create something that's more than the sum of its parts. And you can really do that with just about anything. A lot of times when you think about a wedding cake, you're thinking about sort of classic flavors that everyone loves. So things like citrus, vanilla bean. So I wanted to kind of put my own twist on those flavor profiles. So we have a toasted sesame buttercream, a vanilla bean chiffon sponge, and a charred citrus compote. I think that this is definitely a wedding cake that you can make year-round. The idea is we're pulling citrus that you can find in a grocery store, anywhere. So oranges, lemons, it's really whatever you want to find. And it's going to taste like fresh and vibrant no matter when you make it. Chiffon means it's kind of like a light, airy, absorbent cake. It's almost like a sponge. Hence, it's gonna be receptive to those flavorful soaks. It's gonna freeze really well. But it really starts with 12 eggs. And I'm gonna show you how I have always separated eggs from working in restaurants. You really wanna crack all your eggs all at once. I always start with cold eggs, and that is gonna let the yolk be more separate from the white, and you'll have less of a chance of it bleeding into your whites, because we want those clean whites because we're gonna whip them into a airy meringue. So if you have clean hands, just go right in there and pull out the yolks. So I do that by sort of passing the yolk from hand to hand. So I guarantee you this is so much faster, it's so much more efficient. I hope you'll take this into your home and try it. It's really the best. And now we're gonna do the cake mix. So we'll start with the dry ingredients. And you want to make sure you're seasoning all of your components really well. It's not just about adding flaky sea salt at the end. It's about making sure everything feels balanced in the actual cake itself. So just use a whisk and kind of whisk it all up. And now we're going to do our wet ingredients. Sugar does so much more than make things sweet. It also makes cakes tender and makes them light. It gives them that great texture. I wouldn't recommend olive oil. That's like a very distinct flavor, and we really want to make kind of like a delicate vanilla scented cake. And you just want to whisk everything until it's well combined. Okay, and then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract, which, you know, it does seem like a lot, but this is really the flavor of the cake that we want to come across. So I really go for it, and it just tastes incredible. We're gonna transfer the wet and the dries into a bigger bowl. I'm running my spatula around the edges of the bowl and kind of lifting and pulling up the center of the mix to get it all combined. So it's fine just like this with a little bit of dry showing. And now we can get to work making our meringue. So I'll just get it going on high speed. What you're really looking for is the egg white to sort of start foaming up around the edges. It's going to start getting aerated. It's going to start turning white. So you want to look for all of these visual cues before you add in the sugar. So I won't add it in all at once. I'll kind of add a little bit while the mixer is running, so the meringue has its best chance of being really voluminous and light. I always err on the side of under whipping my meringue because this structure of the sugar bonded with the egg whites is very stable and will actually reinflate in the oven as the cake bakes. Let's see. You can kind of use your whisk as an indicator, so it's sort of like floppy but yet stiff. Okay. So I'll start with just 1/3 of this mixture. In bakeries, we call this sacrificing the egg whites. So we're gonna sacrifice a bit of the meringue to make this mixture easier to work with. I'm just very gently folding and I'm kind of twisting the mixing bowl as I'm folding, gently stirring in this meringue. So once it kind of looks streaky and is halfway incorporated, I'll add the rest. And you can see how sort of billowy and light and delicious looking this cake batter is. So I'll almost stop right here. It has kind of like a undermixed quality to it, but again, once we transfer it into the sheet pans, we're gonna mix it more when we spread it out, so there's no need to overmix it at this point. Okay, so we're gonna make a 2-tier wedding cake from 3 sheet trays of cake, which I love. It kind of feels like magic. It's like, it doesn't seem like that much, but then after it bakes and you put everything together, you're like, wow, I have a huge cake now. This is lined with parchment paper, kind of cut to fit. Sponges that are leavened with eggs have a better chance of rising if you're not greasing the pan. So here I would like not use a nonstick pan. I mean, you can, but I think you're gonna get a better rise if you don't have that nonstick coating. So I'll just eyeball this into 3 pans. You could bake this as a deeper cake as well, but for me, a great wedding cake is all about those really thin layers that kind of interchange with those creamy, moussey fillings. So just use this offset spatula to kind of pull the cake batter into the corners. You just want it to kind of like fill the cake pan evenly. Have you ever made a cake in a round cake pan that's deep and it has that dome on top? When you're baking really thin cake layers like this, there's no doming. Everything comes out perfectly flat and even, and it's so satisfying. And we will bake them off together all at once. Wow, 3 racks, amazing. I think most home ovens only have 2 racks, so you can have a sheet of cake sitting out ready to go. Once those 2 come out, just put the 3rd one in. Whenever I'm making a layer cake, I'm thinking about the way that different textures are gonna come together, different flavors. You know, you want things sweet and salty and acidic, crunchy and smooth and creamy. I think like that's what takes wedding cakes into this like whole other place. So this is our crunchy element. This is actually kind of how I make granola. If I wanna make like a lighter granola that doesn't have like oil or butter in it, I'll make it with whisked egg whites. And what the egg whites do is they sort of bind things to each other, and they act as sort of like a glue, but also when you bake them at a sort of a low temperature, they make things crispy. So it's like barely a recipe. It's more of a technique that we're using to crisp things like seeds and nuts up. You can buy sesame seeds toasted already, which I find very handy, or you can toast them yourself, like, you know, in a skillet. Just watch them, make sure they don't burn. And it's gonna kind of make this thick, beautiful mixture, because this mixture can get very sticky. You want it to be able to easily peel back the parchment when you're done. So just a nice thin coat. We'll pour it right onto the sheet pan. Oh my God, so pretty. We'll take the offset and spread it to fill the entire tray. I think black sesame seeds would be really yummy here too. But I think what we're going for is kind of those clean, light flavors of white sesame, citrus, vanilla, super elegant for a wedding. So once it's all kind of evenly in, transfer it to the oven, and we're gonna let this go for like 6 minutes, and then we're gonna chop it up a little bit to kind of let it crisp up into these little nuggets, these little shards, and then we'll bake it until it's completely crunchy all the way through. So we have 2 beautiful navel oranges and 3 Meyer lemons. You can also use regular lemons, blood oranges, tangerines. It's really whatever you have available to you that you're excited about. We're gonna use this pot not just for searing the citrus, but for cooking the compote later. Get the heat on. This is actually something that I picked up working in restaurants on the savory side, because all the time I would see, you know, savory chefs developing intense flavor through grilling fruits, vegetables, making them into sauces, purees. And I think that this is a technique that can be worked really well for building flavor into wedding cakes too. We don't need these little stems here. We're gonna sear the fruit completely. As the cut citrus interacts with the hot surface of the pot, it's gonna blacken, it might stick to the bottom, totally okay, just let it do its thing. That's where all that flavor is gonna come from, and really add this like surprising depth to a layer cake. So it's not just citrus, but you also get that like incredible blackened flavor. It's so cute, like tucked into its little pot bed. Okay, so we're gonna let this rock for like 8-10 minutes over kind of like a strong medium heat. So I think our cakes are done, so I think we can pull them out of the oven now. I will just go in with my finger. See, the top is kind of springing back to the touch. Sometimes I'll just pull back a bit and just look at the crumb, and I'll see that the crumb's set up. See how our sesame crunch is doing. Still feels a little tacky, so I think we'll let it dry out a little bit more. It's been about 10 minutes, and so you wanna look for this like kind of beautiful blackened edges. The fruit is caramelizing. So just flip everything over and don't worry about scraping anything up if anything sticks, because we're actually gonna loosen those blackened bits with water when we blanch the peel. So we're gonna let the other side now cook for another 10 minutes because we also want those peels to get kind of blackened. This is just such a great way to add like another layer of depth, building flavor, by treating citrus in this kind of like different way. Okay, so we added water to this to kind of loosen the charred bits on the bottom, and we're gonna use this kind of like charred water to blanch the peels in. And as soon as it's kind of cool enough to peel, just get in there and remove the sort of blackened fruit from the peel. And we'll transfer this fruit into a strainer because we're gonna press out some juice and strain it for our citrus soak for the cake layers. Wow, these are so juicy. Once you have all of your fruit peeled, we're just gonna roughly chop the peel so it cooks evenly and quickly in this water bath. Okay, and then this is almost up to a simmer, so we'll dump our peel in. We're looking for 10 minutes or until it kind of feels tender but not mushy. When I'm thinking about soaks, I'm really thinking more about adding richness or acidity or bitterness or something surprising. This cake that we just made, the chiffon cake, it's literally called a sponge because it's deeply absorbent and it can really handle added moisture without becoming soggy. So this is how we're gonna add a citrus component to it, but it's not even in the cake. It's sort of like built in secretly after. We're going to press half a cup of juice for the charred citrus soak. You want kind of like a clear juice that doesn't have the pulp in it. So I'll just strain it one more time so it's super smooth. We don't want anything to taste too sweet. The cake already has sugar in it. So it's really about adding like another dimension of flavor to the cake. And then we're gonna dissolve this granulated sugar in this liquid. So we don't need to bring it to a crazy boil or anything like that. We just wanna melt out the sugar. I love like multitasking when I'm baking too. I'm like, I have a jam working, I have something in the oven, I have a soak going. If you're organized and have a clean workstation, then it's like a lot easier than you think. So I'll even just like take a piece of peel out, you know, like you're testing pasta for doneness. It's on the very crisp side of al dente. And again, you want it to feel tender and toothsome, but not falling apart. It's really just gonna give the compote a head start when we're cooking it with the sugar later. So even in this soak, you can see little bits of the charred peel, which is so pretty. It's sour and charred and a little sweet, but not too sweet. And that's, again, for every cake layer of both tiers of the cake. So it's really not about the sweetness, it's more about the acidity of the citrus. So we'll just set this aside for when we're building our cake. Our peel is fork tender, and we're gonna get rid of all this water. It would taste bitter because of all the peel that's been sort of soaking in it. And you can see how it like loosened up all this kind of blackened bits from the bottom of the pot, which I love. This is gonna take about 25 to 30 minutes, kind of simmering over medium-low heat. You don't have to babysit it, just kind of come in every couple of minutes, give it a stir, make sure it's not sticking or scorching on the bottom. What you're looking for is kind of like a bubbly, even, delicious, jammy mixture. This is about after 30 minutes. The peel is sort of candied and glossy. The mixture has really come together, but it's still quite chunky. So for the purposes of putting into a cake, we're gonna buzz it up. And if your peel is like properly cooked all the way through, it'll kind of almost like disappear into the compote and make it the best, yummiest texture. You can see like there are a couple bigger pieces, totally fine, but you're mostly getting this like beautiful, kind of fine, chunky compote. I also wanted to show one of my favorite pastry secret ingredients. This is citric acid, so it's totally food safe. It's actually used as a preservative, but it's also a great flavor enhancer. A little bit goes a long way. Totally optional, but I just love how this really makes things balance and pop and sing. So now, wow, on the back end, you get that like great little acidity plus the sweetness. It's so good. You know, once the cake gets built, you kind of say goodbye to it and it's done. So this is the chance where you have to kind of adjust flavors, seasonings for your palate. We've made the vanilla chiffon sponge. We've made the charred citrus soak. We've made the charred citrus compote. We've made the sesame crunch. Like, we've done so much. So now what we're gonna do is while these components cool and rest, we'll make the buttercream, And then while that relaxes, we'll build the cakes. So yeah, we're in the home stretch. A Swiss buttercream is what this recipe is based on. So this is kind of my go-to for wedding cakes. I think a lot of European style buttercreams have this kind of egg component worked into them to kind of balance the sweetness of the sugar. Also, because you're cooking the meringue, it's incredibly stable for making something like a tiered wedding cake. What we're gonna do is cook this meringue mixture to a temperature of 155 degrees Fahrenheit. You want a heat-proof bowl perched over a pot that it will sit snugly into. So I always reach for a bowl that's almost a little bit too big, because then I have space to make the gestures and movements that I wanna make. This will take anywhere from 6 to 7 to 8 to 10 minutes. You have to keep moving the mixture as it's cooking, otherwise you're gonna get like a weird omelet on the bottom of your bowl. When I was working in restaurants and we would make massive batches of buttercream at a time, this times 4 in a really wide bowl is actually like very exhausting. But we always joke that, you know, if you're a pastry chef, you have like ripped forearms from whisking all the time. Always make sure you have your digital thermometer here. This is really just gonna tell you that exact moment you're done. And I find that very comforting. I think we're ready to go. It almost looks like melted marshmallow. So what we're gonna do now is transfer this mixture right from this bowl into our stand mixer. Oh, be careful, it's super hot at this phase. And then we will beat it until it feels more room temperature. And you can see that it's cooling from the steam that's getting released as it's being whisked up. You can already see how it's like getting fluffier, has that marshmallowy look. The mixer bowl still feels pretty warm to me. So I'm gonna let this go for a few more minutes till it's easier to handle. And so you're not kicking up all the powdered sugar. Just start on a low speed, just to get it to fall into the bowl. People ask me, what does the powdered sugar do here? It's gonna make the buttercream more stable, but it also adds this great mouthfeel of that kind of matte texture you can only get from powdered sugar because it's also cut with cornstarch. It just feels great in the palate. It helps offset the richness of the butter. I'll start with just a little salt, and once the buttercream is finished, you can really like assess it and be like, it needs more of this, it needs more of that. And a lot of butter. We're making buttercream. There's a lot of butter in here. And you want your butter to be like room temperature soft. I just put a finger into it. And if it can easily go down and hold that fingerprint, but it's not greasy, then your butter is tempered. So I'll just check the temp before we add the butter. Because ideally the butter and the meringue are kind of like the same temperature. So this is sort of like room temp. So this is just cut into tablespoon chunks, and you really don't want the butter to melt out here because you can't beat air into melted butter. So you want it to all work and emulsify into the buttercream as evenly as possible. So I'll crank this heat up. This is the part I think where people like lose faith a little bit because it changes the texture of the buttercream so radically. So it might look a little grainy, it might look a little weird. Again, just have faith. It's like this crazy moment where it looks like a disaster and then all of a sudden it's beautiful buttercream. This is Swiss buttercream. It's finished. It's like ready to go. Perfect for icing, room temperature, not too warm, not too cool. Okay, so we're gonna start with the sesame oil. So want it toasted because it has this incredible depth of flavor to it, which really makes it taste like very unique in its own thing. Then we're gonna add this tahini. You could also use a white sesame paste from like a Chinese grocery store, but this is great for like a sweeter context. Taste it, see if it needs salt. So pretty. It's just got this incredible lightness to it. I think I could use a little more. At this point, I'll just add like small pinches at a time. If the cake is gonna be sitting out at high temps, this is really gonna be your workhorse. When it gets chilled, because there's so much butter in it, it gets very hard again, like hard like a block of butter. So that's why it's perfect for wedding cakes, is it's easy to apply in this state and it's so gorgeous and creamy, but it'll set up in the fridge and really provide that final like buttress and level of support for a wedding cake. I'm so excited to talk about the way that I do this. Basically, this is an 8-inch cake pan, round, nice deep sides. We have a 10-inch cake pan. Also, you want those really tall sides. first what we have to do is cut out our circles for the cake. So to loosen it, I take this little offset guy, just run it all along the edges. I'll just invert it and then peel back the parchment so you can see this beautiful, moist, tender vanilla crumb. So we're gonna get 3 8-inch circles from this sheet of half-sheet tray cake. And get like a little knife, and we're just gonna trace around the outside. We're gonna punch 1 out from the top corner, 1 from this bottom corner, and then with these extra sort of scraps, we're gonna get 2 half moons that we're gonna kind of Frankenstein together. We have 1, another 1, and they're all perfectly flat, totally even, the exact same size. What I'll do is I'll almost kind of like line it right up in the cake, and then you can fill in this middle bar by just kind of cutting a strip out of the cake, putting it right in the center. There's something about it that feels like the assembly of it all is very like craftsy, but it makes me feel really good to be like, we can make that 3rd layer with these scraps, and this way you're getting the best yield possible for this guy. Okay, so good, oh my gosh. Let's set these aside and we'll do the 10-inch guys. Okay, so we're gonna cut these a little bit differently because we're working with a 10-inch cake pan. We're gonna get 1 full one, and then we're gonna kind of get like almost a full one. 10-inch circle here, and then we have half of one, and then we have our final sheet of cake. So what we're gonna actually get to do is make 2 circles from this sheet, using 1 full here, and then almost a full one, and then we'll get the rest of it, the yield, through the scrap going this way. So I just will hold the cake pan right up to the edges where I see there's extra, and then we'll be able to kind of all piece it together. So we have this guy, this guy. Here we're gonna fill in that little hole. And like this cake is so forgiving, you can really like press it in, have it be where you want. So this way we're gonna get 4 rounds for our cake layer. Okay, and as long as you have like the rough shape, it's all gonna work out in the end. Perfect. So this is my biggest trick for making cakes. Lining these pans with plastic wrap so they're easy to remove at the end. So what we're gonna do is put in 1 round of cake, add a little bit of soak. We're going to put some buttercream down, and then we're gonna dollop on the citrus compote and the sesame crunch. So, I mean, it's just like we're just building flavor like crazy here. So think the bottom layer that you put in is actually gonna be the top of your cake. So I always pick my nicest, roundest cake for that top surface. And you can see that these chiffon style cakes almost have a skin on top, and the kind of visible crumb is actually the underside, and that side will receive the soak more readily, so I always will flip them over. So just put it right in, and you can see it fits perfectly. So the first thing we're gonna start with is the soak. I love using a pastry brush for something like this rather than a squeeze bottle, because this way you actually get to feel the liquid sort of being released from the bristles. And I really want that tactile connection to everything that I'm making. So you don't want it to be so soggy that you can see the liquid kind of seeping out of it. You want it to be absorbed and fully integrated into the cake crumb, okay? This looks like a ton of buttercream, but that's because it's gonna be for not only the inside of our cakes, for both of them, but also for the outside. So we'll just put a bit down. Okay, so this is like the perfect spreadable texture. It's amazing. And just kind of spread it out all the way to the edges, because when we peel back that plastic later, you're gonna see how it's all flush, and it's gonna be very satisfying. I'll just flick a little bit off my spoon onto the cake, just like this. So you don't wanna mix the compote with the buttercream, so this helps keep the layers really distinct. And then the sesame crunch. So you can kind of crumble it up and just kind of crunch it in to the cake layer. I just think that's the best thing about the layer cake, is it looks spectacular on the outside, but then you're getting into it and you're like, oh my God, there's even more goodness. Now we're gonna add this kind of sneaky inside layer. So we'll start with this kind of big piece and sort of press it in. So you wanna knock out any air that might be in between those cake layers. So you put in the smaller piece and then these weird little scraps in the center. But then what you have is a perfectly flat, smooth, even little cake layer. Now we're just gonna put the lid on. I'll put the kind of skin side of the cake down, nestle it right in. Press the air out like this, and then 3 more tablespoons of soak. And at this point, you could put it in your fridge, let it rest overnight. You could put it in your freezer. It could rest there for a couple weeks. We're gonna do the exact same thing to the 10-inch guy next. We're gonna use slightly more of everything for this cake because the cake layers are bigger. So we're gonna do a full cup of buttercream in between the layers. So we're gonna basically divide this compote into thirds. So we have 3 layers that we're going to hit here. And the sesame crunch is gonna soften as the cake rests, and it's just gonna become this like delicious, chewy, nutty aspect to the filling, complement all that citrus. We're gonna do both of our kind of stitched together layers on the center. And then we have our last kind of weird little guy. I also we'll build that kind of perpendicular to the last one, if you remember, because that way they're kind of supporting each other at an axis, and then the cake will be more stable. And the third layer of fillings. So because these layers are so thin, like alternating with the creamy layers, the compote, the cake layers, this means the cake is gonna be really solid and nothing is sliding around. Our final cap of cake. And this cake is a little taller because we have an extra layer of cake, we have an extra layer of creamy filling. I'm always just trying to set myself up for success, and that means if I'm freezing the cakes all the way through, when you take them to the wedding, when you transport them in your vehicle, they're gonna stay firm. When they're sitting out, maybe under sun or outside or all night long during dinner, they're gonna stay firm. So I think this is a step not to skip, but you can certainly condense the process as well. Okay, so these can go right into the freezer, and then we're going to wrap up this buttercream, and we can keep that in the fridge until we're ready to ice these cakes. Oh, they're heavy, okay. This is the extra buttercream that will kind of coat the outside of our 10-inch and 8-inch cake tiers. I like to chill it overnight, or at least for a few hours, so you get that perfect consistency. So I'll just get it going on medium-high speed, and you can let this go for 4 or 5 minutes. And it might look a little grainy or broken, and this is completely normal for a Swiss buttercream. With enough time, enough speed, the buttercream will kind of re-emulsify, look really smooth and shiny. It sort of looks like hummus right now, actually. And this is kind of the perfect consistency, temperature, texture for applying to the cakes that we have made. This is a cake turntable. It rotates and sits on like a very heavy piece here, which makes it easier to kind of get that professional finish to your buttercream. But if you don't have that, just right on your countertop. But you definitely want a piece of cardboard or some kind of support for your top cake layer. Put your piece of cardboard right in the center of your turntable. Because we're inverting the cake, the bottom of the cake is the top, which is the flat, perfectly even side. So the cardboard cake round should basically almost be completely covered. So this is like 2 cups of buttercream. So once I've sort of pushed it off the sides this way, you can kind of pull it down. And the buttercream is so rich, you really just want kind of that thin coating on the sides. A lot of professional bakeries do apply what you call like a crumb coat layer, which is a very, very small amount of buttercream where you can almost still see the visible cake layers through it. And that kind of seals or traps in those cake crumbs. We're not trying to make like a perfectly frosted, even, immaculate cake. We want to see that it was made by hand by you. Where I'm applying the buttercream is sort of obscuring the cake cardboard on the bottom, so that when we put this on top of the bottom tier, you won't even be able to see it at all. If you're using the turntable, you can kind of add buttercream and then move it like this, and that's how you're gonna get those beautiful sharp layers. So once you have the sides coated, that's when you can kind of go back to the top and sort of make it look pretty. Because the buttercream has been re-whipped, there are some bubbles in the buttercream. If you kind of work it with your spatula like this, that's kind of how you're gonna press out some of those bubbles. And then I'll go back, kind of clean up the edges. And you can kind of like pull off this excess here, but I also kind of like that look. The whole point is we're making a wedding cake from scratch at home for a friend or a loved one. It's like, what is your preference? Like, what do you think looks pretty? So this can go back in the fridge. This is the 10-inch guy, the big guy, nice and tall. This is gonna be our base. The cardboard cake round. This one is a little bit wider than the cake, and that's intentional. And if it's not perfectly centered, this is your time to kind of like adjust it into place. This is completely frozen. This is gonna defrost like a dream. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm just gonna pile it on top. This is the moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, the wedding cake is happening. Like I'm seeing it all come together. So I've got the cake roughly coated. And now I'm just gonna use the extra buttercream I have to kind of like make it look really pretty and nice. Okay, I might switch to a larger spat now just to get this kind of even look all the way. So I'm spinning the turntable while I'm keeping my hand in place. That's what's kind of creating this level, flat surface. Again, you can like kind of take a peek, see how you're doing. I love kind of having a little bit of excess buttercream on the sides. I think it looks really pretty. And this like kind of little lip here is gonna be so great to sort of hold in, maybe of like a little kumquats that wanna tumble around, you know, that will kind of give it a place to sort of knock up against. And that's it. All of the work that you're gonna do at home is finished. So these cakes can be chilled in your fridge for 1-2 days in advance. And then all you'll do the day of the wedding is bring the cakes with you, bring your decor, and you'll build it on site. So we've stored these cakes on sheet trays. It's something I can hold. You can kind of put it down on something and it won't slide around. So we have our 2 cakes that have been rested, are thoroughly chilled. The buttercream is cold. We have this beautiful platter here that's sort of inverted. So you have this great little inch height lip to kind of elevate it from the table that you're putting it on. So this is really the part I think that makes people nervous, but I am here to tell you it's all fine. So to loosen the cake, just kind of run the offset along the edges, and then you can kind of pull it away. There are a lot of things you could do at this point. You could put it right in the center. I also kind of like the look of a cake layer being slightly offset, because then you get that nice, beautiful shelf for decorating. So usually when I'm starting, I'll build like a larger message or concept at the top. So maybe we're like just doing the full lemon and adding little fresh wedges. I'm so taken by this calamansi, and then we can kind of just use this to sort of fill in and create these like beautiful little moments. These kumquats look so cute cut in half. So I love how these kind of sit on the edges here. Maybe one more tiny sprig here. Do a little more lemon, a few more kumquats. And then we have these beautiful olive branches. And these actually already have this kind of like natural curl. Maybe we'll add some olive right on top. And then I'll kind of like take a look at it from all the angles. Oh my God, it's so pretty. It's gonna also be so fragrant. It's really show-stopping. I'm sorry, but I just don't think like you can buy cakes like this, but I do think that you can make it yourself, which is what makes this feel so revelatory. Just a little more here. So pretty. I mean, this really takes it over the top. The moment that everyone at the wedding is going to be waiting for is to eat the cake. So the things that you really need, if you want the clean, sharp lines that you get from portioning a cake, is you want a container with hot water in it, because that's going to make the cake slices look really perfect and great. We'll remove some of the decor from the cake. If you have a cake helper, you know, handing you plates, bringing you fresh water, you know, everyone's had a little champagne at this point, everyone's ready to dance. It's like, this is the fun part that can get kind of chaotic, but this is always what people remember. We're gonna cut it into thirds this way, all the way down until you feel that cardboard. Dunk your knife into the hot bane to kind of clean it. That way you're not dragging crumbs through your next cut. It's like, think about all the work you just did. It's like you want that cake slice to look really great. So instead of kind of pie wedges from a radius from the center of the cake, we're making a grid, and you're aiming for a 1-inch slice. So you'll get a smaller portion, which is more traditional, I think, for weddings. You're gonna get a larger yield, and that's really what people want, is just, you know, that perfect size of cake. I love nothing more than a beautiful cross-section, and this is really one of the prettiest I've ever seen. I think we should try it. We're not at a wedding, but it's time. Wow. I mean, it's absolutely delicious. It's not too sweet. The citrus flavor is really pronounced, but there are also these cool burnt notes in the back end. The sesame oil, it adds this richness and nuttiness that is so great with fruit. I think this is a cake that everybody will love. This will surprise them, but also feel like comforting and delicious. I hope that everyone gives this a shot. It's a big project, but when two people decide to get married, it's such a monumental and symbolic occasion. There's nothing more special that you can do than making it from scratch. It's really a way to say, I want to celebrate and I love you guys, so.